before I do my introduction, I would like to invite Ivan Kozachenko, who comes from the Multilingualism Empowering Individuals, Transforming Societies. I tend to mix up the words there. To say a few introductory words, and then I say how this project fits into the larger project that is financing a large part of this day. So thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you,
If you would
Erika.
like to come over here, so I can.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. And I have a short address from principal investigator of the Multilingualism Empowering Individuals, Transforming Society project, from Professor Wendy Ayers-Bennett. We are delighted to be able to sponsor this exciting research and conference under our flexible funding scheme. Multilingualism Empowering Individuals, Transforming Societies is an interdisciplinary research project funded by RHRC under the Open World Research Initiative. It is led by the University of Cambridge with partners in Belfast, Edinburgh and Nottingham. We are a large multidisciplinary team of 35 across different disciplines ranging from literature and culture through the history of ideas, linguistics, education and cognitive science. The aim of the project are to demonstrate the value of languages to key issues of our time, show the benefits of languages to individuals, communities and nations, find new reasons for people to study languages, demonstrate that language learning is not only possible but also beneficial whether you are age or background, transform attitudes towards modern languages, including those of the general public, practitioners and policymakers. The project adopts a holistic approach to languages in the UK, embracing not just the languages taught traditionally in the UK schools and universities like French, German and Spanish, but also indigenous languages of the UK such as Welsh, Irish, Scottish Gaelic and its community of heritage languages. Erika's project fits perfectly in the work of our Literary and Cultural Strand, which undertakes a study of cultural texts and events, narrative fiction, poetry, theatre, cinema, that foreground problematize and form questions of linguistic diversity, unity, identity, power and quality of life in the public sphere. The World Wide Web is a tool which could potentially homogenize culture, but which also offers a space for artistic creativity and the mixing of languages, cultures and forms in new ways. The project's focus on the place of language in digital communication has the possibility to bring a new understanding of multilingualism, language use and interactions across languages in the contemporary world. So I'm wishing everyone to have a great time and a very productive conference within these 2 days, and special thanks for Erika for organizing this conference. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'll stay sitting so you can see the screen behind me. As Ivan just explained, this project is embedded in the larger project on multilingualism. That's one of the attachments. However, it is also continuing on a previous project I started here at Lancaster with another workshop in 2016, October 2016, which was called Screening the Literary, which was also sort of first manifestation of my interest here at Lancaster in digital cultures. And it builds on that project, taking further an interest in languages and how languages impact our work on the web and vice versa. And it is also a third kind of embeddedness is a project that we are working on with Claire Larsson now on digital authorship more broadly. So the project will continue also on sort of two lines which are intertwined. On the one hand, there will be another conference and two public engagement events here in Lancaster next year. And on the other hand, there will be other events at Paris University of Paris 8 from October and then continuing from that. So you will be on my mailing list now for the next events if you are interested in all those things. So there is an intertwining of different kinds of topics that come together. Of course, digital cultures in general, authorship, for which here at Lancaster we have a research hub that was established in 2014, and it's called the Authors in the World. You might have heard about our website. I was also advertising it previously. and I'm taking that in the direction of digital authorship, and of course multilingualism here. So the objective here really is to draw attention to languages in the digital space, and the digital space and the digital in languages in a broad sense, and in culture also in a broad sense, and the mixing of languages and as they exist in this more fluid space that is the web, and rethink what that means for interaction, human interaction, and for individuals as well. And I think this is important, this kind of multiple attachment and directions, precisely because research into modern languages and cultures tends to be a little bit compartmentalized, especially in the UK, but I think that's the case probably in France and other countries where you come from. And there is little space for bringing the different perspectives together. And at the same time, in this country also, new media studies are also quite distinct and separate from modern languages. So there isn't much research on modern languages cultures, so cultures of other countries in the digital space. So that's the sort of institutional angle also that I'm interested in. But so I have a little introduction to set out a little bit more the theoretical background for this. And I would like to begin by citing an email from Maria Mencia, who a couple of weeks ago asked me if I knew of any scholarship on multilingualism in the digital space. I guess an obvious question to address to me, since I invited her to this event. And I said not much, in fact, because it wasn't very obvious to me looking at the literature on the scholarship, especially from the side of research on digital cultures and digital literature. If you look there, there are things on individual languages and individual cultures a little bit, beginning to emerge, but not much on how the languages interact in this space. So when planning this project, I was really thinking based especially on the digital literature, digital cultures research, where I'm coming from. And in fact, this pattern that I noticed when thinking about this event was that there are a number of authors and artists whom you'll see here around today and tomorrow, who are very multicultural in their background. They often have moved away from their country of origin, and then they live between languages and between cultures. And again, this pattern is there, but not much talked about as far as I can see. So I thought it would be interesting to address that kind of issue. Also, the relevance of this pattern actually was highlighted in a very interesting way, because when I started advertising the call for papers for this event and then the program, I got a number of emails from different artists who said, "Oh, me too, I'm interested in this, and I'm multilingual as well, and I live between cultures as well, so they'd like to participate." I was a bit too late to integrate everyone, but I am keeping a list for the next event, so it's growing, and there clearly is an interest in that. So the impact of the web on language is far from being under-researched, in fact, since at least David Crystal's now classic Language and the Internet, which was first published in the very early days of the web in 2001, where Crystal already highlighted how the effect of participating in a global network changes language, and he pointed out the creative potential of the encounter between languages and networks, and the network. Others then came to alert us against the dangers of the so-called digitalk, to use Kirsten Haley Turner's term. And both discourses, so the positive and the negative one, usually tended to focus on one specific language. It went beyond English, but it was usually either how the French is impacted, how Spanish or whatever writing of that specific language is impacted by the web. And it was digging a little further into journals specialized in multilingualism and linguistics, rather than scholarship on digital culture and electronic literature, that I found that, in fact, networked multilingualism is an emerging area of research in linguistics. It's a very recent field of interest, because it's just a few years ago that a Greek scholar called Yanis Androtsopoulos, a Greek scholar living in Hamburg, writing much in English, who is researching this field and who proposed this term, networked multilingualism. And I'd like to quote from his paper that was first published online in 2013 and then in a journal in 2015, so quite recent indeed. He says that recent scholarship, can you hear me by the way at the end? Okay. Recent scholarship recently proposed concepts such as polylingualism, metrolingualism, and translanguaging signal a shift of focus from linguistic systems to multilingual speakers and practices, a critical view of language as an ideological construct, and, very important, a move towards theorizing fluid and flexible relations between language, ethnicity, and place, as well as between linguistic practice and the ownership of language. And he explains that already metrolingualism, that's the second quote there, metrolingualism shifts away from asking how distinct codes are switched and mixed, and aims at explaining how language users manipulate the resources they have available to them. And it focuses on creative linguistic conditions across space and borders of culture, history, and politics. So rather than taking an essentialist and centralized sort of approach on a concept of language, it's more the mixing and movement that becomes interesting. And Androtsopoulos notes also that the focus in research and the theorization of these phenomena is mostly based on spoken interaction in face-to-face settings. And he argues that, I quote again, computer-mediated discourse not only instantiates processes associated with metro and polylingualism, but forces us to extend their theorizing. So he says that it's an entirely new approach to language that is potentially there, or in any case, a partially different approach to language. So it is precisely such an extension of our thinking about digital literature and digital authorship that I am inviting you today to attempt as well, in a slightly different direction than Androtsopoulos himself, who studied the social media interactions of multilingual users, but not of artists primarily. And I would like to combine this perspective proposed by the Greek scholar, his conclusion that network language practices are simultaneously local and transnational, with Serge Bouchardon's observation that electronic literature can be considered as a privileged mode of digital writing, which serves as a laboratory, as an experimental space to explore and rethink writing on the one hand, and the digital tool and the digital space on the other hand. Serge argues that electronic literature has a heuristic value, as the very title of his latest book says, La valeur heuristique de la littérature numérique, the heuristic value of digital literature, electronic literature. And he says that by looking at, I say also that by looking at this privileged form of writing produced by multilingual authors, I believe that we can indeed learn something about networked multilingualism more generally, and vice versa. We can potentially learn something about digital authorship through the prism of languages, something different. So this event and the whole project entitled The Creative Web of Languages, which is this series that will continue in Lancaster, then aims to open a space to explore the combination of these two perspectives, the creative potential of networked multilingualism and the place and uses of multilingual competencies, and the coexistence of languages in digital creative practices. The further implications of both and of combining these approaches will be touching necessarily on questions of identity, society, communication in the digital age more broadly. We will have to talk about the fluidity, stickiness, and permeability of languages and cultures to one another on the web. But also about the relationship between humans and machines, between human and machine languages, and the intertwining of everyday modes of expression, everyday creativity with arts, and the digital artistic practices, and also further how that might involve some sort of political position taking due to the different approach to languages and what they mean. And all this will indeed promote a non-essentialist understanding of each player and component in this complex game, including language, linguistic and cultural identity, literature, art and creativity, as well as authorship. So I will propose a brief preliminary overview of what sorts of things I think I can see at the moment multilingualism might mean in electronic literature. and digital art and culture more broadly, and in what ways this might manifest. But let me say a few words about another very closely related discussion that is emerging in scholarship on electronic literature in particular, and that is the role of specific individual languages and cultural traditions in this supposedly global electronic literature. So in the book I already cited, Serge Bouchardon retraces the history of French digital culture. Claire Taylor, who I'm delighted will join us tomorrow, has written a book about Latino American culture, digital culture. Michael Hawks has published a book on the Chinese digital culture. Riyam Hosni just finished her thesis on Arabic electronic literature, and articles have appeared in English on Polish, Japanese, and other electronic literatures. In a paper published just a few months ago, however, Leonardo Flores argues that it doesn't make much sense to talk about national traditions within electronic literature, because the development of electronic literature is more determined by technological advances, technological progress, and by the evolution of software, hardware, programming languages, than by the national heritages. This is also a fair point, and I think that the two sides of the debate are beautifully drawn out in these two snippets of interviews that I would like to show you. Some of you might have seen it because I posted on Facebook, and I hope there should be sound as well. You will recognize the people there?
Of course it is possible, because literature is basically about language. And
Sorry,
person.
sorry, the English didn't go through. Is it strange? Oh, sorry, this is another one, yeah? Oh, come on. I'll just close the PowerPoint because it would be a pity not to see the people talking. Good now.
Of course it is possible, because literature is basically about language. And personally, I experienced this huge difficulty to translate my own text in another language. Why? Because you lose something when you translate. Perhaps you also gain something, but you definitely lose something. And I think that, for example, Francophone digital literature exists, and it has its specificities which are in the French language, and it's just so incredibly difficult to translate. And you should accept that yes, there are different languages for this literature, and that it's not always possible to go instantly towards English.
I find that very difficult. I don't think that I don't think that you can have a national electronic literature, and probably the point is of electronic literature. The point probably is of not being national, but being more across boundaries and kind of multilingual communities.
Skeleton bridge.
Okay, so I think the two perspectives are quite nicely summed up in those, and I'll be delighted to see the two speakers here to speak in the same panel. So they come here? Okay, great. So we'll take the discussion further. I don't necessarily think that there is a head-on contradiction between the two perspectives, but perhaps they're addressing the question from different perspectives exactly. So these divergent sounding responses of the two multilingual digital artists also highlight that the question about the existence of distinct linguistic and cultural traditions within electronic literature is inseparable from the place of multilingualism in this space and our understanding of it. So what sort of things are there that can be considered as part of the multilingualism on the web in electronic literature? I also agree with Astrid Esslin here that the distinction between digital electronic literature and digital art is quite arbitrary, so I understand electronic literature in a broad sense. And so the first thing that we can consider as multilingual in this space is obviously the multilingual artists, authors, who speak and use more than one language in one work or across their oeuvre. They may be living and working in a different country than their country of origin, as is the case of most of the artists that you see in this room, with one exception, I'll let you guess. The language they move towards is more likely to be English than any other language, though it's also not exclusively the case, as Alexandra Seymer shows that it can be different as well. We could also well imagine works that involve several languages, while the author is otherwise, if not monolingual, not necessarily a fluent user of any of all of them. Androtsopoulos, the linguist I quoted before, and others also highlighted that in fact that we need to, I quote, break with the assumptions that a certain level of competence in is a prerequisite for successful multilingual practice, and that using a language implies particular ties to its original community of speakers. So basically it says you don't need to come from a culture and you don't need to speak a language perfectly to use that language, bits and pieces of that language, and that have a multilingual practice. For instance, this work, I won't go into the link not to spend more time on it, but Andreas Matthias Jacobs' La Res Socialista Internationale has on one page, I think 7 languages going, even though they are mostly translations. So he wrote, I believe, just one of the texts, and the others are combined on the same page, and it's an animation. If you'd like to check out, it's a very nice combination of images and dynamics of language. Jacobs can nevertheless be said to be the author of a multilingual work that builds on the dynamic potential of the digital environment to question, among other things, the spatial separation and perhaps the separability of languages. This deconstruction of the essentialist concept of well-circumscribable languages is even more emphasized when the texts in question are not translations, but generated from a mix of languages, as is the case of Jean-Pierre Balb's tantalizing Babel poesy, for instance. It's a beautiful mix of languages. If you'd like to check out again, I won't go into the link. That said, even when they play with and disrupt languages, and even when they were created by multilingual authors, works of electronic literature still mostly use one language in one space. But they might exist in multiple languages through translations by the authors themselves or by authors. And this would be the second case of multilingual presence on the web. This is the case of Serge Bouchardon's Déprises, about which I think he will talk more in detail, or Alexandra Seymer's Böhmische Dörfer, where you have a presentation and the other versions appear on the same page, or Maria Mancia's Winnipeg, which also opens from the same page in different languages. So what is interesting here, in addition to the specific translation questions that electronic literature raises, is the fact that, unlike in the case of books, where we rarely see the same works in different languages on a single stand, here you have the different translations accessible from the same place and accessible in the same virtual space, so that an originally monolingual work becomes a showcase, in a way, for linguistic plurality as well. And we will hear more about translation throughout the 2 days. So this was the second major possibility, the translation, for multilingual works. Thirdly, we can also broaden the concept of languages towards semiotic systems and modes of cultural expression. In this sense, virtually any work or content on the web speaks several languages at the same time, and artists are also the ones who speak these languages rather than just consuming them. The textual is hardly separable anymore from the visual, which is increasingly also animated and can be supplemented in both sense of the term by audio. And each channel and their combinations have now rather well-established codes, most internet users will be familiar with, even without realizing mostly, and codes that can be exploited or subverted. This is a very well-developed area of media studies and less the center of our attention here, but we will also see some of the related questions by Kadia Belfari's paper on emoticons. And last but not least, we need to consider languages beyond the languages used between humans and look at code in the technological sense. Any artist doing code work themselves will likely to be multilingual when it comes to programming languages, even if they may have various degrees of fluency in each one of them. The artist speaks a different language with the computer than with the user or reader of their work, and there is a series of translations involved in both the creative processes and the execution. If knowing more than one language is empowering for a print author, it seems a must for the digital artist wishing to realize all aspects of their work themselves. As a basis, then, a digital artist is by definition multilingual, and they might be doubly multilingual in both human and machine languages. And the coexistence and interaction of natural and artificial languages in the creative process means a different mode of thinking that could constitute a whole new direction for thinking about multilingualism as well as about literature and writing. And to give a taste about how far this can go, I would like to cite Gia Carpenter, who explains the complex set of translations and transmutations involved in her work entitled Transmission, a Dialogue. Here's a passage on the use of memory. She writes, "Transmission, a dialogue, sends and receives dialogue on and through source code and associated media haunted by generations of past usage. This haunting may be understood, in part, to be the result of an operation of memory. In a programming language like C, war equals refers to a specific location in memory. Location is always both a practice and the act of locating that place. Thus, a location always exists before it is located. Yet, rather than assigning variables to a specific location in memory, JavaScript distributes the operation of processes including memory across networks and devices. Until it is referred to, the location of a variable may be anywhere. Once it has been referred to through a process known as garbage collection, a variable may disappear, or the reference to it may disappear. This mode of dispersed temporary and transitory memory allocation suits the performance of a narrative text of place and displacement nicely." Now, I admit that my non-computing brain grasps very little of this, of the technical aspects of these operations, but Gia herself in this text very nicely highlights how these can also be seen as a metaphor of geographical locations and cultural memory. If these operations seem abstract as they happen through invisible electric currents, they are also grounded in physical processes somehow. Similarly, location, locating, displacement, memory, and dispersion related to physical spaces are very much at the core of multilingual experience, and the more abstract space of the digital network allows them to be presented and performed in their natural complexity. So in the face of oversimplifying discourses on migration, becoming aware of the potential of this space is an opportunity and a responsibility as well, I believe. So let's talk about it. Thank you.